As Red Bull and Ferrari are busy imploding right before our very eyes, why is nobody talking about what George Russell is up to? He might be mounting an effort to try and do what Kimi nailed in 2007. Raikkonen, not Antonelli. The only thing Kimi Antonelli was nailing in 2007 was learning how to walk. As 2025 is starting to piece itself together, one thing to have made itself known somewhat is the relative stability of a certain team led by a certain Austrian. Ah yes, I think you know which one I am talking about. Yes, Mercedes find themselves in a rather interesting position after 3 years of reality check after reality check. With the W16, the trials and tribulations of this regulation cycle may have produced a car which could finally provide the team some closure. The confidence we saw from George Russell after his Las Vegas victory last year manifested itself even more boldly than at that spangly event in China. Because you've only got to look at the championship standings and what we've seen thus far in the 3 races that we have had so far, because yes, I do count the sprint in this particular stat. In the 3 races that we have had, George Russell has kept himself within the top 4, with 2 visits to the dais alongside the 2 McLarens. 1 point behind Max Verstappen, 3rd place in the championship, and still very much within that gaggle of drivers, which is now 4 strong. Especially since you could easily argue that with all the changes Ferrari made to their car for this year, that they basically just played themselves, and Red Bull's own crisis, or Mercedes, they've already been through that, they've come out the other side. And whilst the beef between Verstappen and Russell has since rectified itself after it blew up in a big way at last year's Qatar Grand Prix, the aftermath of that particular exchange began to formulate a Russell who was not going to go quietly into that good night against the Dutchman, that he was starting to position himself as a potential rival to the Red Bull-backed Verstappen. Now, I can already sense that you may be groaning or even cringing at me putting yet another revenge arc on a particular driver, but like with my other instances, I feel like it is perfectly justified in the case of George Russell. This is the first year where this chap can actually fully extend his wings and not be within the shadows of very key and legendary people within the sport. In fact, I would argue that probably 2025 is the first opportunity since the year 2020 when George could just go all out with no expectations, and that the onus is on him to just fully excel. Because George has really stepped into the leadership role with gusto and composure, and honestly, why shouldn't he? In the 3 years he spent as the teammate of the 7-time champion Lewis Hamilton, he didn't buckle, nor capitulate. Sure, Hamilton edged him out by 3 points at the end of the day after 3 years together, but in terms of race wins, it was George who came out ahead 3-2. And if he hadn't been disqualified in Spa, it would have been 4-1. What I'm trying to get at here is that George, he held his own against Lewis. That's something to be proud of. And now without the spectre of Lewis Hamilton looming over him, as well as the expectations of his supporters, George Russell has come out of his shell and has an obvious spring in his step with his trusty sidekick Kimi Antonelli alongside him. And I know exactly what you are going to bring up in the comments as you are watching this video, that, oh, both Kimi and George have no contract for 2026 and Max Verstappen may make himself available. Toto would be a fool to allow Max to slip through his fingers for a second time. Yes, those are perfectly valid comments, it is true. Both contracts are up for renewal at the end of the season, and there has been no word on the matter, and Toto has mainly kicked the can until sometime in the summer, at least back in Melbourne. But when you get Toto describing Russell as a warrior after his performance in Shanghai, and bestowing a 10 out of 10 rating for his performance that weekend, which is rare coming from Toto, who in that same comment famously said that he never gives 10 out of 10 because there's always room for improvement, that kind of praise suggests that maybe Russell's extension is all but inevitable. And the same goes for Kimi Antonelli, because, come on, the kid has 22 points to his name. He has already endeared himself to the wider world because he got a Driver of the Day award and had no idea why he even earned it. Seriously, he's just as confused as some of us are for him getting that reward. Arguably, either Ocon or Behrman should have gotten that accolade. And again, you have to look at the championship standings. Both Mercedes cars are in the top 5. Kimi Antonelli has held his own in wet and dry conditions, especially when you consider that in China he had more floor damage which compromised his own performance. He scored points in every single race he's been in, and he's also the 2nd youngest point scorer of all time, second only to Max Verstappen. So for those of you thinking that, oh, they're going to change the lineup for next year, think again. There is no way in absolute hell that Toto Wolff is going to change this lineup, because he's got it good right now. He's got an Italian Stappen. So I would expect, amongst all of the chaos and fire of Ferrari and Red Bull, to Toto making a press conference announcement with George and Kimi right alongside him and saying, yes, these boys, they are going to be alongside me for many years to come, so we are a big happy family and we are looking forward to more progress with Mercedes in the near future. Beaming like a Cheshire cat, George there, Kimi there, they're all smiles and rainbows and sunshine, whilst their competitors are having their own little fires to try and put out. All's gravy at Mercedes at the moment, and you might be thinking I'm biased, but come on, you've only got to look at what's going on with the rest of the competition and realise Mercedes are actually in a good place, finally. Because it's resulted in the chap from King's Lynn finally having a platform in which to try and mount a bid for the 2025 World Championship amidst the really imperious-looking McLarens. And considering that many pundits and experts are ruminating that Mercedes may find themselves in pole position for the more engine-backed regulations next season, ideal conditions for a second wave of Mercedes domination could be developing if they have a solid lineup that could be lasting several years. Which could also go some way as to why there is mounting speculation about Red Bull quietly pushing in the background for a delay to those regulations. Now, I must clarify here that there is a little bit of speculation here because I said the word speculation. Christian Horner has denied these speculative thoughts, but it is something to ponder that maybe there might be some strife going on at Red Bull powertrains after all with these brand new engines. Interesting. It's actually, you know what? It's phone for thought as well. Just think about it. Don't make rash conclusions yet, okay? But what else could justify saying that George is at the beginning of his revenge arc lore? Well, you only need to look at the W16 itself. The 2025 Mercedes car could be described as the first design which was primarily crafted using George's feedback more than Lewis's. Because with Lewis's departure and then heading over to Ferrari announced so early into 2024, which by the way, according to his Drive to Survive interview, Fred Vasseur said that he instigated this announcement so early to try and nip speculation in the bud, provide fewer distractions for Ferrari, and they could get on with their bid to try and win the Constructors, which they narrowly missed out on by 14 points. They did everything they could in Abu Dhabi. But therefore, understandably, the development of the 2025 car would become far less and less Lewis's priority or necessity for him to even be in those sort of meetings because, well, he's not going to be driving it. And this is something that Lewis Hamilton has arguably never experienced before in his entire Formula One career. Him being iced out of meetings since, well, he could easily be considered taking secrets with him to Ferrari. Not suggesting that he would, but that's just part and parcel if you're a driver who is leaving a team, much like how Carlos Sainz probably was no longer required to attend meetings about the 2025 Ferrari car since, well, he was leaving to go to Williams. It's par for the course. You could describe that maybe Lewis was experiencing culture shock, because when Hamilton departed McLaren, it was so late into the 2012 season that by the time the news broke he was off to Mercedes, there was little time to gather one's thoughts before he left Woking and headed for Brackley and Toto. This huge lead-in time for his move to Italy could have easily been described as a bit of a blow or a surprise or a shock or just novel to Hamilton. So with this feedback becoming less and less relevant for next year's car, well, this year's car, and this is understandable, it's not a means to degrade Hamilton, the work of James Allison has produced a car which seemingly seems to be in quite a good spot. That it's managed to claw back some of the pace that was not there with the W15. That it was a sound platform, it just lacked pace. You know what, it's kind of similar to what the RB21 is right now. The feedback from Russell has been centre stage for the W16, including Antonelli's and maybe even Bottas's late comments when he was announced as a reserve driver, because his feedback would be relevant in a way. It may have produced a car which has become far more predictable. In fact, it's vital that it should be predictable, because according to Autosport's deep dive into the car, Antonelli's arrival would make it crucial for Mercedes to build a car that was intuitive, giving him the best possible start to his career with a car that is easily versatile and understandable, and most important, easy to drive, that he can make it work with his limited experience, and as things go on, he can then provide more nuanced comments, and then things can improve from there. And once again, it highlights the differences in how you treat a rookie between Mercedes with Antonelli and Red Bull with Lawson. Yes, I know you're sick and tired of that particular subject, but this is yet another example of what Red Bull are doing right now with that team and that car is simply not working. Because indeed, focusing on the Italian Verstappen as well as George Russell has produced a car which has resulted in Mercedes being second in the constructors, 40 points ahead of Ferrari at the moment, and also a decent chunk ahead of Red Bull at the same time. I don't think Mercedes were expecting this. This solid platform will pay off, provide some very much needed closure for all concerned during this particular regulation cycle, which has been a huge test of fortitude for the team, as well as much necessary change, especially when you take into account the cost cap, which seriously impacted how the team could go racing. No longer could they just throw parts of the car willy-nilly. They had to get a lot smarter with their choices. And another way that George Russell could maybe get his revenge this year is to do with the way that the wider public, the Formula One fandom, views him as a person. Because it's quite needless to say that many Formula One fans view George Russell as somebody that they can't really vibe with, that he may come off as wooden, rather corporate, artificial, geeky, whingy, all that sort of stuff. Many people saying that maybe after his career in Formula One, he could maybe dabble in politics, perhaps become a British MP. And in some circles, you may even consider him disingenuous or two-faced after what happened in Qatar. Admittedly, one thing he would say in public was completely different to what he said with the stewards. It certainly didn't help his reputation, and it resulting in that rather arbitrary one-place grid drop for Max Verstappen for the Losail race, which ultimately didn't benefit Mercedes or George at all, and then Max still romped off to a really decent result. So what was the point of doing all that then? It didn't work out for you, George. Oops. And what might go some way to perhaps redeeming Russell's standings with the F1 world is the matter of the radio debacle that came out of Shanghai related to Ferrari and team orders. Ultimately, Formula One management has admitted fault and broadcast the full course of events, which proved that Lewis suggested a swap of positions and Ferrari were not imposing team orders on any one driver. With a YouTube video on the matter, the broadcast of team radio, whilst quite important to the way Formula One operates, and a very nice little feature to have, is something that now should be treated with a various degree of salt pinching. Because, as has been made evident with what happened at last weekend's Grand Prix, it can easily paint a driver or a team in a certain light to try and boost ratings and fan engagement. Fred Vasseur's swift and vocal response forced the issue into public view, something of which I've been yapping on about from atop this ladder for a very long time. By picking and choosing radio transmissions, TV producers and directors can construct a narrative to provide maximum entertainment. Now, it's all very well and good for Drive to Survive to try and do that because, well, it's an entertainment platform, Netflix, so we've all come to expect that from that platform, that they are going to circumvent certain truths and make up their own storylines. But for Formula One management, with the official broadcast of a Grand Prix weekend, to just not include that first part of that conversation and exchange, which is really important for context, it's dangerous. It throws into speculation many other perceptions we have of drivers over the last few years. Because with Ferrari not taking the matter lying down and stamping out discourse over the relationship between their drivers promptly, you know that F1 were responsible for this because they made a video response. It really makes you think about how Yuki Tsunoda, Max Verstappen, and most importantly for this video, George Russell, are perceived. The times we've heard them on the radio either making comments about people turning into them, railing against pit wall calls, or even swearing, what was the real ratio of those messages when compared to other, more standard exchanges which may seem unentertaining? So I think what Fred Vasseur did was perfectly valid and reasonable to do. In fact, it's actually quite important, and maybe we should try and just readjust our expectations of team radio and look at them with maybe a broader perspective. And if you have the access to Formula One TV or the actual team radio of various drivers, then use them, very importantly, to try and gain fuller context. I wish I could, but thanks to you, Sky Sports, I can't get F1 TV, and no, Crofty, I am not going to become a Sky Glass TV or Q customer. But there's even more reason to be hopeful about a Mercedes resurgence now that Lewis Hamilton has moved on to chase new dreams for Ferrari. With Russell at the helm, the team can streamline its internal dynamics and hone development around his driving style exclusively. Something which may then pave the way for Toto Wolff to fully craft a Mercedes F1 team that really resembles the ideal image that he might have had in mind in this new era of Formula One. Because let's be real, it needed to happen, especially with the cost cap. There is an argument that can be made that what worked for Mercedes back in the day when they really surged themselves to a point of being a legacy team, all of the successes they had for several years, it simply just doesn't work anymore. Because yes, in the early years, before the cost cap and ground effect came in, Hamilton's standout personality and Toto's willingness to let him operate independently alongside the team, it created a dynamic that was crucial in establishing Mercedes being that particular dominant force. Also, Hamilton's drive, confidence, free spirit, and unorthodox approach to things may have helped push the limits of the car's performance even further. And that maverick spirit resonated well with a team hungry for innovation, with unlimited funds to boot, when compared to other teams. However, as the sport has evolved, and you do need to indeed be smarter with your upgrades, you have to pick and choose what will actually help improve the car, you have to make efficiencies, you have to make changes. So perhaps that freewheeling nature of having Lewis Hamilton alongside Mercedes in this era of Formula One, the ground effect era, may have been just simply not in step. Where we are right now leaves little room for personalities that demand bespoke treatment or for management styles that accommodate extensive individual preferences. In this climate, a unified, consensus-driven approach is increasingly vital, and this probably extends to Red Bull as well, what with Max Verstappen and the team focusing around him in terms of driving style and development of the car. Because the previous tolerance for a driver's independent ways might inadvertently slow down crucial, systematic development work overall. Wait a minute, I hear you say. Are you suggesting that Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen have now become a liability for their teams? Well, perhaps. It's certainly a topic worth having a discussion about. But I want to bring the topic back to George since, well, this is a video about him. Because logically, Russell upon joining Mercedes would have brought a fresh perspective to car development. He expressed confidence in avoiding previous pitfalls, stating to interviews with Sky Sports that he thinks it's going to be a significant change for this year, and that probably they've been a lot more disciplined with every change that we have made with the W16. And with Hamilton now moving on, Mercedes has an opportunity to recalibrate its internal culture, potentially paving the way for a more cohesive strategy under George Russell's leadership. And coupled with the fact that both of them are really representative of what Mercedes expects for drivers, then this could easily surge forward the team's adaptability with these brand new regulations. The W16's development could be focused on addressing prior weaknesses, particularly in slow corners and tyre temperature inconsistencies. And Russell's consistent form and emerging leadership, though not without friction, offer a refreshing contrast to the legacy-driven Hamilton era. Moreover, with the infusion of new talent like Kimi and a renewed technical strategy, Mercedes might overcome lingering issues with car performance and adapt more effectively and swiftly to these brand new rule changes. And speaking of Kimi, I must point this out to you, and this is incredibly important as to why I don't believe Mercedes needs Max Verstappen anymore, is that both these drivers are from the Mercedes Junior team. The first time that we have seen this, and can easily be a lasting endorsement for that particular program over the likes of the Red Bull Junior team, over the Ferrari Driver Academy, or even the Alpine Academy. They are crafted examples of what the team expects. They get how the team operates and what is expected of them. They are in step. Sure, there are elements that Lewis Hamilton brought to the team and the table which shall endure, and rightly so, such as the desire and enthusiasm to be inclusive, improve workplace culture for all, and the unyielding hunger in which to win and overcome obstacles. Those are valid and laudable legacies, but equally, the place where F1 is today, and with regulations having produced convergence, you need to have two drivers who are similar in pace to one another, who get the overall program, and are not likely to have differing driving styles, that they are on the same page, which is exactly why McLaren finds itself where they are today. And if they can keep their papaya rules in check, and Norris and Piastri can actually keep it clean on the track, sure, they may be taking points away from one another, but at the same time, they won't be causing disharmony, and then McLaren can romp off to defending their constructors' title. However, with Mercedes being relatively close and really solid when compared to Ferrari and Red Bull at the moment, if Piastri and Norris do come to blows with one another, and there is discord being spread at McLaren, then Mercedes could be really ready to pounce with their consistency and their cohesion for George to scamper up right behind Lando and Oscar, just take those important podiums and maybe occasional win or two, and then just win the championship, like Kimi did against Fernando and Lewis in 2007 by just 1 point. Yes, it's only a singular point, but in the history books, it doesn't matter. He would have won the title. For McLaren's sake, I really hope history doesn't repeat itself. And that one driver rules all mentality, It's something I think Max is even beginning to cotton on to over at Red Bull, with his comments suggesting that perhaps some more love should be given to the second seat, so it no longer chews up and spits out teammates. And whilst George, as a man, has still got some work to do to try and convince the wider world of Formula One fans that he is not as whingy or as two-faced as the media paints him out to be, or in some circles a co-conspirator or saboteur against a certain Lewis Hamilton, Russell has a platform in which to start turning things around, rewrite the script that has been written which has painted him in a negative light. Sure, he is quite geeky and speaks with a rather posh tone, but those qualities shouldn't be things which should write people off, especially considering that those are traits that, I, a ladder man, have. I speak from experience. But he certainly has the raw talent and potential to at least try to mount a title bid this year. But it will depend on a few critical factors for this to fully manifest itself by the time we return to Europe. Again, you have to look at where we are right now. After 3 races in this season, 2 Grand Prix and a sprint, George Russell has just quietly got on with the business, whilst Max Verstappen tries to rediscover some potential in his own car, and then people are wondering about what's going to happen with papaya rules on McLaren, and then Ferrari's own particular stumbling blocks at the beginning of the season. Mercedes have just got on with it. They've got a car which is really solid. It's uneventful. It's boring. But that boring car has produced a really solid campaign, and again, is 40 points ahead of the Scuderia. I think that Mercedes, if you had told them that this would happen 12 months ago, Toto would have said, it's absolute poppycock and pumpernickel. How on earth could we actually be 40 points ahead of Ferrari at this point with our car? There's a real opportunity for George to become a dark horse this year. If the car remains competitive, compliant and benign when compared to the W13, 14 and even the 15, especially under the constraints of the cost cap, then Russell's drive, maturity, racecraft could really translate itself into a strong title challenge and maybe reshape how the wider world views him. And not to mention, you can look to what George Russell has been doing with advertisers and sponsors of the team, and he just goes all in with those brands. Most recently with Einhell, which provide, I think, gardening products, and according to George, he does love to mow the lawn. He was there mowing the lawn and trimming the hedges and stuff like that. He just went in all guns blazing. It actually reminds me of a certain Jenson Button, another driver who arguably held his own against the likes of Lewis Hamilton when they were teammates at McLaren. He understood that sponsors were very important to how a team operates and can go racing, so it's best to just go all in, do what the sponsor says, get on with the job, get your paychecks, make sure the team can actually afford to make developments for their car, and then go home. That was what Jenson did. He did all sorts of commercials for McLaren, Honda, whatever team he found itself in. And George Russell is emulating that. And maybe he's also emulated holding his own against illustrious champion, like Jenson, with 2 drivers that it nurtured for years. Yes, Lewis helped Mercedes find a guiding light for a record-breaking long time, but nothing lasts forever. And if Russell's rise signals a cultural reset at Mercedes, then Isaac Hadjar's Australia might be the canary in the coal mine for Red Bull's decline. To find out why Isaac Hadjar's actions sparked a real fiery debate about the efficacy of one Dr. Marco, watch this video next, straight after this one.